Hey guys, welcome to the my lesson. Today I'll be teaching faith and how faith produces obedience. So first we have to start out with defining faith. And the Bible tells us in Hebrews 11:1 that faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. And this is a bit of a wild definition to me because I'm somebody who likes to think logically. I like to reason things out. And so when it says the evidence of things not seen, um, it really shows us how it has nothing to do with the human experience. Um, one thing faith is not wishful thinking. Faith is not manifesting. Um, faith is not believing that God will grant all your wishes or desires, but He can do all things that align with His will. So it's not like God is a vending machine from whom we can just demand stuff or whatever. Um, So just because we want certain things doesn't mean that God will grant them. That's not what faith is. Faith is believing that God has said that what God has said will come to pass. So it's about trusting His character and yeah, not us obtaining our promises through Him or our desires, I should say. So the book of Hebrews, the chapter Hebrews 11, is a very great read about there's a lot of examples about faithful um, persons in the Bible that we know, like Sarah. It says, verse 11 says, through faith, and also Sarah herself received strength to conceive seed and was delivered of a child when she was past age, because she judged him faithful who had promised. Um, and so here we see that Sarah is, despite her being past age of giving birth, she judges God faithful and she holds on to his promise. And so her it's not about her understanding of she's reached a certain age, she can't give birth anymore. It's about what God has said will happen. Um so we understand that faith transcends human understanding. And also verse 17-19 says, by faith Abraham, when God says to him, offered Isaac as a sacrifice. He who had embraced the promises was about to sacrifice his one and only son, even though God said to him, it is through Isaac that your offspring will be reckoned. Abraham reasoned that God could even raise the dead, and so in a manner of speaking, he did receive Isaac back from death. And I find it interesting that Abraham actually tried to reason his way out. He tried to um, outsmart, I don't know, like he tried to outsmart the natural laws. Like what I'm trying to say is God already promised that through your offspring you will be reckoned. But at the same time, God is telling him to sacrifice his son. So how does that logically make sense? How are you gonna say that I'm gonna have this great generation to Isaac, but at the same time you want me to sacrifice him? It just doesn't make sense. But I like how Abraham reminds himself that God can raise the dead because he trusts in God's character. He knows that um, despite us knowing that us humans understanding that death is the end of life, um, Abraham is like, okay, I don't understand what's going on, but I'm going to trust God that He's going to somehow provide a way. He's not going to contradict Himself. And then verse 26-27 says, esteeming the reproach of Christ greater riches than the treasures in Egypt, for he had respect unto the recompense of the reward. By faith he, Moses, forsook Egypt, not fearing the wrath of the king, for he endured as seeing him who is invisible. I like that it says, esteeming the reproach of Christ greater riches than the treasures in Egypt. And that's what faith comes down to. For faith comes down to doing a comparison, right, of our circumstances and God's character. And we always just have to recall that God's character is God is who He says He is, and so our circumstances should not compromise our faith. So one thing I've noticed here is faith involves the recalling of God's character, because it's not about the what, but it's about the who. Um, and another story that I wanted to point out was the story of the centurion in Matthew 8:5-13. If you can just go there real quick. I think it's a great example of faith, especially because the centurion is a Roman official who really is not supposed to be interacting with Jews because of the animosity that they have between the two people, the two two groups of people. And Matthew 8 says, okay, verse we can start at verse 8. It says, but the centurion replied, okay, verse 5 says, when he had entered Capernaum, a centurion came forward to him, appealing to him, Lord, my servant is lying paralyzed at home, suffering terribly. And he said to him, I will come and heal him. But the centurion replied, Lord, I am not worthy to have you come under my roof, but only say the word, and my servant will be healed. That's that's what faith really looks like. But only say the word, and my servant will be healed. There's absolutely no doubt in there seems to be no doubt in that statement. It's just about trusting that God has authority over life. And he emphasizes that point when he says, for I too am a man under authority, with soldiers under me, and I say to no and I say to one, go, and he goes, and to another, and to one another, come, and he comes, to my servant, do this, and he does it. When Jesus heard this, he marveled and said to those who followed him, truly I tell you, with no one in Israel have I found such faith. And so we really see um, faith being played out here by the centurion, because he understands that Jesus had authority over life. That's something even the Jews didn't fully comprehend. We see that with even Peter doubting Jesus when walking on water, or when Jesus is in the disciples are on the boat. It's like he's fully aware that um, God is in control. Jesus is in control of everything, even natural things. And so I just thought that was a great example of faith. And so how does faith come about? Romans 10:17 says that consequently faith comes from hearing the message, and the message is heard through the word about Christ. And so that's how we Christians receive. That's how we came to be Christians today, right? Somebody announced the good news to us, and we believed. So somebody had to have declared the word. Somebody had to announce it to us. And so my question would be to you all is, how would you define faith? And would you mind sharing some times where you've demonstrated faith? Um, like an example, in like a modern day example of faith, is like an overweight person not committing to their exercise until they believe they will get the results. So it's first the belief of getting the results, because and even sometimes, like when people have before and after um pictures of like how they lost weight, like their weight loss journey, or like there's testimonials about it. It does, sometimes that's not enough to move an overweight person. Like he has to believe that once he puts the work in, um things will change for him. That's and then the Bible talks about, and there's even a greater level of faith which comes from not even seeing, and which is the kind of faith that God demands from us, not even seeing things and believing them, just trusting that what he says will come to pass, like what he told Thomas in John 20:29. I think he said, you believe because you have seen, but blessed are those who believe without seeing, something along those lines. And like something else that we do, like for example, I go to college, right? I'm pursuing a degree, and before I even um, attended college, I already had faith that I'm pursuing a degree to get a well-paying job. But before attending college, I already had faith that the sequences of actions that I would take will eventually lead me to graduate in due time. Going to classes on time, going to classes every day, going to office hours, going to networking events, um, watching tutorials, just everything that I do in preparation, during college is like I have faith that the actions that I'm taking now wouldn't have happened had I not have faith that I would eventually get a degree. And not so great example of faith is actually like, for example, we like, let's say you like, we as teenagers, we like to buy things. We want to get a new laptop, we want to get some new shoes or whatever. And um like, and sometimes we start imagining in our head, like even before getting a job, let's say we know the job, we know how much it pays, we start already calculating the paycheck. Okay, this is how I'm gonna make, how much I'm gonna make every 2 weeks. This is how much I need to budget. This is how long it would take for me to save up to get whatever I want. And that's not, we're not operating in faith then, really, because we already have things planned out. We already have, everything is already calculated for us. And honestly, I find myself operating from that perspective a lot because I like certainty. I don't like I don't like I don't like the unknown. But we I think when it comes to God, we have to remind ourselves that we're talking about the creator of the universe. We're talking about somebody who's omniscient, omnipotent, somebody who is able to sympathize with us at the same time. And so it only makes sense to give our faith to somebody like that. Um, and then James 2:17-18 says, in the same way, faith by itself, it is not accompanied by action. But accompanied by action is dead. But someone will say, you have faith, I have deeds. Show me your faith without deeds, and I will show you my faith by my deeds. And I think that this is what the lesson here in this verse is, that obedience is evidence of our faith. What we do is predicated upon what we have faith in. And so I can't a lot of the times we don't declare that we have faith in certain things, but what we do shows us that, shows the world that we have faith in it. And so I just don't think it makes sense for anybody to say that they have faith in God and then they don't follow his commandments. Like, how are you gonna have faith? um how you can't just, faith is not just, it doesn't stop with professing. It just doesn't stop with professing because um there are certain things that God demands of us. He wants us to trust him, you know, because of who he is. And so if we go to the next slide, um James warns us about it. In the book of James, we're warned about this. It says 22:24, chapter 1, 22:24 says, do not merely listen to the word and so deceive yourselves. Do what it says. Anyone who listens to the word but does not do what it says is like someone who looks at his face in a mirror and after looking at himself goes away, immediately forget what he looks like. So so the law is a mirror which reflects our imperfections. Therefore, something must be done once we are aware of them. um yeah, so it doesn't make sense to receive the good news, or um understand the law and look at yourself in the mirror, see your filth and not clean yourself up. um then you don't have faith, because um it's like you don't trust the mirror. You're deceiving yourself. It's like you see the reflection of yourself, um but you tell yourself that, oh, the mirror is not properly made or something. Or this is, we're talking about a mirror. It's like, it would be different if it was like a phone where like you can edit yourself or whatever. But like a mirror is pure. A mirror just reflects who you already are. So um it doesn't make sense that you look at yourself and then don't clean yourself up. And that's action. Cleaning yourself up is the action. If you have faith that what you're looking at is a mirror, and um it's letting you know who you really are, then you have to clean yourself up because you're dirty, unless you want to remain in filth. um Verse 27 says, Religion that God our Father accepts as pure and faultless is this: to look after orphans and widows in their distress, and to keep oneself from being polluted by the world. And that's action, that's sanctification. Romans 12:2 also talks about that. Um, so what are some actions that we should take if we have faith? Romans 6:11 says, "So you too consider yourselves dead to sin but alive to God in Christ Jesus." So we are to die to sin. We are to keep ourselves from being polluted by the world. No, that's action. Um, and then another thing about faith is, so there's two things that comes with faith, right? Um, there's duty, and then there's also identity. Um, by faith we are made righteous. The Bible talks about this all the time. It is faith that makes us righteous. It's not the works that we do. The works that we do are evidence of the faith that we have. Because Second Corinthians 5:21 says, "For our sake you made him to be sin, who knew no sin, so that in him we might become the righteousness of God." And that's why the Bible talks about Abraham being the father of faith. Um, um, it says, Matthew 5:48 says, "Be perfect, therefore, as your heavenly Father is perfect." Being perfect, that's what God requires of us. We can only aspire to that if we have faith that we serve a perfect God. And yeah, that's just the point that I wanted to drive. So, um, let's see. I think it's also important for us to understand that God takes great offense. He takes very great offense in our disobedience. Going back to Genesis 2:17, say, God gave a commandment to Eve to not eat of the forbidden fruit of the tree of good and knowledge of the tree of knowledge of good and evil. But she disobeyed, and that ushered sin into the world. She displayed a lack of faith in God and His plan, and God took great offense in that. Um, to us, it might not be a big deal, but God really cares about. He's a jealous God. He won't tolerate us not trusting Him. And unfortunately, today we live under grace, and we can come to Him. We have we we have that relationship has been restored for Christ, but it doesn't mean that we still don't need faith, because we don't live we weren't there when Jesus died. We've read the word, and we have faith just by listening, like I mentioned earlier. And so we have to live out as though we actually do have faith. um it's just a reminder that and also, like, um when we have faith, like, we can recall things like, Ephesians 1:4 says, "God chose us in Christ to be holy and blameless in God's presence before the creation of the world." So having faith, like I mentioned, is believing that what God has said will come to pass. God says that we have been made holy before the creation of the world. you know so um so we don't have to engage in sin. We don't have to, because God has a plan for us. Um he's already worked things out for us, and so we just have to work in that. We just have to walk in that. Sorry. um and then, Romans 3:23 says the wages of sin is death, and death is separation from God. So um yeah, so it's just something to remind ourselves that sin is the sin was birthed because, you know it all came from just lack of faith by from Eve. And so that's another reason why faith is so important, because not having faith produces sin, and then sin produces death. And so, yeah. um so just to leave you out with some questions, I just have some, to do's. um you can just read it out for yourself, but yeah. um faith is definitely something that's important. um I can just trying to just think of um like an example of my life. For example, if I had to just say something a little bit about myself, was that like with my parents, mm, I can definitely say that they display a different level of faith with me when it comes to like driving, for example. um I'm somebody like whenever it comes to driving, I would always rather use my mom's car, like because she has more faith. She doesn't really ask me like too much about um how far do I have to go or whatever. Like, he just have faith that I'll come back safely. But with my dad, he's more pragmatic, and he just puts a lot more limitations. And so really faith is um just the point that I'm trying to make is that um with faith, right? Like, faith is followed up by action. And so the length to which my mom, you know, the degree of freedom which my mom gives me with driving is a reflection of the faith that she has, um, versus my dad. And I'm just that was the whole point that I'm trying to drive. That um, faith produces action. And so, yeah, hope that this message was encouraging. And yeah, thank you for tuning in.